Great. So you get some time to think a bit more. Daniel, I have a first question for you because actually both of you mentioned the term of aesthetics. And when we often discuss aesthetics, there's a common presumption that we're referring to the pursuit of appreciation of beauty, in German language at least. So in philosophical terms, aesthetics encompasses much more, including the study of sensory experiences, perception, the nature of art. Maybe Daniel, first, could you clarify for our audience how your approach to aesthetics within the realm of games extends beyond the conventional focus on beauty?
Well, I'm a professor with a denomination on this, but it's not so easy to do actually, because I'm that. Maybe I can say 2 or 3 things. In the tradition, aesthetic has less been understood as merely sensory properties, but rather a kind of judging things, a kind of relating things. Like when I watch Ratatouille, I'm not treating it as a general case of movies per se, but I'm having to get into this movie, follow its structure, and get its logic somehow into my eyes and ears.
I hope you're entertained.
Yes, of course I was. I love the movie. But and another thing would be to say, when judging those things, we have an internal relationship, and this is trivial for you, of course, between what it's saying and the way it's said. We cannot just pull out the brain substance, but we rather have a kind of formal organization of the things, the thing this artifact is doing. And beauty in this stuff we call aesthetic predicates. Aesthetic works of art and movies can be elegant, harmonious, daring, and whatever, and they are part of judging these items. We don't treat those items as mere general cases, or mere cases for something more general, but we have to get into the specific object. This could be a starting point. I could give a lecture on this.
Yeah, I can imagine. So when you talk about judging these things in a way, how can this framework basically deepen our understanding or the cultural significance of games or stories? How can this benefit us? Maybe another, or put in another way, how or why should philosophers today look at video games or movies?
I mean, they are looking at movies since 70 years actually, because it's mainstream artistic medium. And video games have long been 20 years ago, and all the German listeners know it, they have had a really bad press. They were like a hobby of male, young, a bit difficult nerds sitting there having to program stuff. And even we had like 23 years ago, so we had this debate if they are training for killing. And luckily we are beyond this now. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's one of the most important, you said it actually, the income of the whole industry, I think it's more than movies and music together nowadays. It's crazy, it's really huge. And you cannot, if you look at everyday aesthetic practices, you cannot ignore video games. They are just everywhere. They are mainstream, everybody uses, is acquainted to it. And like you also said, not just younger people, through all ages actually.
Mm-hmm. And Jan, it was great of you showing the examples of Florence and also of the Vatican Museum, and also talking about flow and fun.
Spaß.
After your lecture, how would you imagine, or what would be your wish for those places after talking about your experiences that you have? What would you propose to those people?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure I have a solution, because they have the problem of being too popular and trying to get the throughput of all those millions of people who've somehow decided it's time to see this and see that before they die. Yeah. And therefore it's crowded, right? It's a crowd management problem more than an engagement problem. Mm-hmm. There isn't a difficulty getting the audience in. There's a difficulty getting the audience to pay attention, because they don't have time to stop and watch. They're herded through. That's a nice problem to have if they're paying tickets, right? But it's not good for the culture. It's not good for understanding what's going on.
Yes.
What I really like, I thought we had a kind of same sound and note there somewhere, because you started on a rather critical note actually. Yeah. And I think, there are parts of the infrastructure and logics of game which afford this kind of detachment of attention. This is, if I got it right, which you were saying, not everything, not every part of gaming, but it could lead to this. And I think, yes, it's right. Like you told the story with the app, there is the tendency to not be able to look at, to let in stuff anymore, because it's all kind of, do I get something out of this? Is it a point for me in this game or something like this?
As a storyteller, my interest is in getting the attention of the audience and keeping it, and there being a result to that attention, a point, a reason for my asking for your attention is saying, I'm going to tell you a story, and by the time the story's finished, you'll be glad you were told the story, and you won't hate me.
Yeah.
That's a low bar, but that's a minimum, right? And you won't be unhappy that I took your time, because we're time-bounded creatures, and time is the most precious resource we have. So was it worth listening to my story? Did you learn anything? Was it significant? Or were you at least entertained? At least entertained? Was it a pastime that calmed you down or made you feel better? That's on the aesthetic level. As an aesthetic experience, did it do something for you? And then, did it, in addition to being an enjoyable experience or at least tolerable, did it leave a residue that was worthwhile? Did it add to your own personal culture and connection to others?
Good.
I mean, you were talking also about flow. When I play maybe with other people in a band, music, we also talk about getting into the flow. We start jamming, we start improvisation and so on. In those particular places, Florence and the Vatican, is flow something that's possible there? And what would be the role of the actual space and the architecture in making that maybe possible?
Yeah, if you've got such a huge collection of artifacts that you can barely put them on the walls, the flow, I think, is just the flow of humanity through the corridors, and not on an individual level. No, I don't want to be so cartoon hypercritical of the Vatican Museum. It is a fabulous place, isn't it? It's if you know what you're going for, if you have a specific idea of something that's important to understand and to feel, and there is no substitute, in my opinion, to physically being in the presence of, especially sculpture. Sculpture is present in space, and that is one of its fundamental characteristics, and it's very important. It's being there. And so if you really want to appreciate a piece of sculpture, you've got to be there.
I actually think sometimes flow experience wouldn't be right concerning those objects. You would miss something about them because they can be irritating. Yes. I mean, this could be part of a problem if everything fits together too well and goes together too fast. I think, and going through a museum for me is an experience of letting stuff in to put it now really high. I mean, to make those experiences with objects you don't know before you've seen it, that don't just fit in your everyday practices, but somehow pose an interruption. I'd say an interruption. They are not just, I don't think they're just, you cannot walk through like this with this Blizzard game. You cannot just have this kind of experience. I think I wouldn't want this in a museum, actually.
I think in the museum, if I may, in the museum context, in that traditional museum context, flow might refer to being engaged in the story of the artifacts or the art objects that you're looking at in such a way that you enjoy the experience and time passes in a way that you are unaware of. In other words, you are present. You're not running for the exit. You're actually there paying attention. That is the flow in that context. And it's the same that you might have in enjoying a good conversation. You've all experienced a good conversation. You have a good conversation, time goes by, oh my goodness, we've been talking for an hour. I hardly knew. And somehow we were feeling it as a very strong experience.
I have to look at the audience because I enjoy this a lot. So we have one question over here, and the second one over there, and the third one over there, and the fourth one over there. So Paula, could you, I'm not sure who was first, but you can start there.
I think you were first.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for the lectures. It was really helpful to understand what the story is and this aesthetic quality of games. The first question is to Dr. Pinkava. You mentioned about story. In story, it is important to consider this flow experience. But in flow experience, two dimensions are there. So skills and difficulty. What kind of skills and difficulty are involved in story? It's a bit so tricky question, but I want to hear some example.
Oh, I see what you mean. You know, in all honesty, I'm sort of saying, and this is why I'm a bit subversive here, that the story experience is, for me, more important than the game flow experience. In other words, when I tell you a story, if you're engaged in the story, if the story is something that you are entirely paying attention to, that is the flow, right? Any movie that you enjoy, any game that you play, although my son said something about, and here's a proposition which I know some people in the room won't like. He said something like, the story that a game tells is the story of the player's interaction with the game. That's an interesting proposition. I'll just leave that there for you to think about, whether that's a real thing or not. But my son said that yesterday. I didn't answer your question, did I? I can't give you exact answers of like story flow as in immersive storytelling of the sort of stuff we tricked Google into doing. It is paying attention to spatial theater that's digitally generated around you in your virtual environment in a way that is doable, because it's quite challenging to construct these experiences in a way that isn't boring. It's hard to do.
Second question?
It's kind of a long question, so I had to write it down to get the phrasing right. So how would you stand to the concept to kind of force the player to learn certain things inside the game to like complete the game? For example, math or history. So like imagine a combat game where you don't only like play against each other in teams, but you also have to like solve math riddles or find certain historic things to kind of win the game. And do you think this would be really helpful in school education even to use early on?
I didn't catch the end of the question.
Oh, do you think this kind of concept would be helpful to use in school education even early on?
Do you have an opinion?
I have an opinion. I mean, there's a whole area of serious games you probably know all, yeah? I mean, one of the most important example has been Paint Buckets Through the Darkest of Times, where you experience somehow the time of the Nazi regime. I think this could have a space in the serious games area, but I'm not sure. The problem with those kinds of, if you have a game who says, hey, you're gonna learn the history, if you play me, that's terrific. My kids once tried this, just doesn't work. I mean, it's just like I think if you play this, you just feel like you have an excuse for learning something, and you probably should do something else in this case. I think it's really difficult to do this kind of serious games which are just there for education and without being bad games, actually. I think there are a few examples.
Thank you. We have one more question from Isa, I think. Yes?
Mr. Pinkava, thank you very much for this mesmerizing presentation.
Oh, thank you.
I was very delighted to see that you chose this word combination of history and the story, because exactly that what I want to mention. And the thing is, I consider like the digital media is something that disconnects us from the time and sometimes also from the space, because it's another reality which doesn't have the same space. Also, we are in a museum. You mentioned this is a location where we go to, but as soon as I have my digital media and pursue this location through my screen, this disconnects me from this time and space. And I was thinking of like the example, the bones of the dinosaurs or the whale. And it is something very attractive to see how this animal or being have been in back then. But if I am like kind of my attention is attracted from this digital media and I won't be able to in a flow in this location pursuing the real bonds, so maybe I might be disconnected from the story what the real object is going to be able to tell me. Like I won't be able to maybe pursue all these tracks on these bones and the signs which the like the science time left on those objects. I won't be maybe able to pursue that. What do you think of that? I mean, I'm meeting you now with a like a contra argument, but I just wanted to know about your opinion about this.
In the context of putting flesh on the bones of the fossil in the museum, as an example, yes. So there's the one idea of, okay, if I can do better than having to look through the window of my phone, and I've got some wonderful glasses on that superimpose this on my vision. Yes, it is something that perhaps takes me out of the exact feeling and time that I'm in, for better or worse. Maybe better in some contexts. And you're saying, oh, there's something interesting about the bones themselves. Without all this layer, how have these bones survived? How have they been affected by time? There's more information there, more interest. If someone can help me look at that and explain that to me, or if I'm already interested in that and I just want to look at the bones and enjoy, or at least, enjoy the question, goodness, how did these bones survive so long? Or why is it that they're textured in this way after the millennia? That's me following my intention, isn't it? That's me following my desire to know or to what is appealing to me in that moment. Different kinds of stories that are superimposed on the same thing. How did this creature move is the simulation thing. What do its bones look like after 10 million years is a different story. And why not do both? Why not do all of these different things that we can appreciate from this object if they're there? And if I'm with somebody who's knowledgeable and can also tell me how the bones were discovered and what it took to assemble them and why there's controversy about whether they're real or not, that's really interesting if it's interestingly told to me. Right? There are many ways. And we should do them all.
We have two more questions, and then there, and then one here. Yeah.
Yes. Hello. The term enjoyment was mentioned a lot today, and I'm really that maybe the museum is something you enjoy, a piece of art is something you enjoy, and then you showed those really horrible pictures and paintings. And so I find this, and also enjoyment was mentioned, I think also with Mike, with the games, that a game has to be fun, you have to enjoy it. So I think it's a bit confusing for me how those two things can come together when I think about the horrible sculptures or pictures or paintings. What could this mean actually?
Is the question about the quality of the aesthetics of the experience, that they're horrible?
Yeah, exactly. So when we play a game and it's about joy or enjoyment, how does it? That's my question actually.
I mean, if I understood you right, you wouldn't say this kind of experience you have with the objects in the museum are merely enjoyment. You focus on this point a lot. There's an intellectual, cognitive dimension in it. And I mean, I think this kind of experience can be somehow also painful, but in an interesting and good way, that you challenged, disrupted, but the overall experience is nevertheless worthwhile. You take something from this, it's becoming part of your personality. Like this analogy, like in a good conversation. You go out as another person, then you come out before. And this is why I see your question, of course. I find it very important. I think, not answering for you, but we could agree on that.
I couldn't have put it better. Thank you for answering.
It's not a mere enjoyment. It's a deep kind of experience you have.
It's engagement with it's engagement with the thing. if I'm watching a good production of Macbeth, is it fun? Murder, murder, murder. Is it engaging? Boy, is it. It's a great play, if it's well done. And even if it's badly done, it survives terrible productions because it's such a strong drama, right? And it's tragic and disturbing and tells you something about the human condition. Not fun, but really worthwhile. Yeah.
The last question.
The last question, yes.
Hi. I have a question for both of you in a way. Oh, there's also another question about the storytelling, because I find this aspect very interesting. How would you think about, because the museums themselves have the problem that storytelling is necessarily, but also if we don't know the real history behind it, it's a lot of interpretation. So also it's a lot of emotional baggage that you're giving the visitor, whether you want it or not. And there's always this discussion, can we really inscenate something that we don't really know about it? Or is it necessarily? Or is the pure facts too pure, too dry in a way that you can't really engage with the visitors? How would you think about this aspect?
Well, I find an artifact. I bring it, right, and then what can I do? I mean, it's a very good question. Am I going to just show it to you and say, look, I found this? Finished. I won't tell you anything about it. I don't know enough about it. I won't tell you what my guesses are. Well, if I'm a museum curator or if I'm somebody who's, to some degree, could be called an expert, someone who has worked to understand the history of this thing, I should try in some way to tell you, I think this about it, right? I'm not sure. There's lots we don't know. It's not a mathematical algebra. It's an interpretation of a distant thing. But our best guess is blah blah blah. Perhaps this, and that immediately brings it alive to me. There's something about it that I can suddenly see. Oh, it's this in fact, and it's part of this, and that's the current understanding until someone finds out something else, and then we reevaluate and say, no, actually, it was this, and obviously because look how it's made, and now we finally understand it, and that's a process over time, and at any given time we have to give it our best guess, and at least try and communicate what that is as best we can. That's as far as my thinking takes me anyway.
I mean, to add something, I find it interesting actually, but you're the expert on that actually. If the museum communicates these gaps, actually, I think it's dangerous to go over the uncertainties, and I would feel betrayed somehow if somebody would just, so a pejorative sense, tell me a story about this. And one remark on games. Of course, you all know that games are not all kinds of games, and not every aspect of games is story-driven. There has been a big dispute 10 years ago in game studies: are video games or are the narrations? And of course, I think the game side is righter than the other side, but if thinking about gamification in the museum, I mean, if you think from the logic of chess, and not there's a queen and she's attacking the pawn, but if you think about the game structures, this is a completely different approach. I just wanted to remind there could be also, I think you would agree, something else than stories that could be interesting, taking over from games to participatory dramas.
You mean there's something other than stories?
Yes. Substantial. But I agree, they are very important, and you're the expert on that.
No, of course.
I mean, adding to this, there was one interesting exhibition in Vienna at the Naturhistorische Museum where they invited Wes Anderson to look at their archives and curate an exhibition based on the stuff that interested him. So also he was not the expert, but he curated through a way of choosing these things. He created micro stories all around the way. That was also pretty interesting and a new experience.
That sounds also like a story about Wes Anderson.
Yes, a bit, yeah.
Like all
You could see that actually. We have one more question
Yes,
in the front here.
Yeah, I want to ask about the question of responsibility in gamification and spatial design, because I think there is, like I have two stories. One story was a YouTube video about an interview in VR chat, and there was like this, the interviewer interviewed this boy around the age of 14 maybe. He was autistic and didn't like to interact with people in the real world. And that's why VR chat was way more helpful for him, because he could, like, they wouldn't judge him because of his appearance and the way he acted and stuff, and he was way more welcomed in VR chat. And I think that's a really, like, beautiful example of how spatial computing, or like also the gamification, because he was Kermit the Frog, like his hero of choice, and it's like a really beautiful example. But then you have also like the movie, I don't know if you know the movie Hyperreality by Keiichi Matsuda. It's like this hyperreality where someone goes shopping and then they have like, oh, there's your new Tamagotchi dog, you can go buy this stuff, and then you can go in there, and then it's like bling, 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 and it's like, this lens is, like it's the kind of, yeah, the, what is it? Untergang.
Dystopian.
Yeah, dystopia, yeah.
So many dystopias.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in, because, I mean, you can tell great stories like Ratatouille, but also like questionable stories like Coco, I would say. So I think there's always a responsibility in creating those things and how you interact with them. I just want to know your thoughts on that.
Yes. I think you just sketched very good the dialectics of both sides of gamification, the dangers and possibilities.
Can I honestly say I'm not entirely sure what you mean. And you're probably close to making me understand. When you say responsibility, responsibility with respect to the subject? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. You're 100% right. In fact, it may seem perhaps a trivial point. I feel that I am the person I am because of the stories I was told as a child. And that, if I look back on it, the responsibility of the storytellers, for me, was huge. I was formed by those stories. And so when we tell our children stories, and we are all children, aren't we? When we tell each other stories, of course we have a responsibility to think about what we're doing to each other. On the subject, do we have a moment? Do we have to stop? On the subject of aesthetics, a few years ago I gave a speech at FMX mentioning Alfred Gell, a British anthropologist, who put away the traditional anthropological perspective on art, the art of primitive cultures, and the aesthetic question. He said that the right way to look at art is from a Philistine's perspective, to entirely eschew and forget the aesthetics. And a useful way is to, in fact, consider function. What does the art do to us? And once you decide to be a total Philistine and put the aesthetics away and think only about how it affects us, then I think you're closer to the movie maker and the person who's trying to mess with the audience, right? When I'm a movie maker and I have a responsibility to you to not traumatize you, to not mislead you, to not give you bad ideas, to engage you, to entertain you, but to finally, the meaning of what I'm telling you, to be something worthwhile, not BS, right? That's my responsibility, that in fact I have a message that I care about, that I'm interested in you understanding something and feeling something and carrying something away with you, and doing that through the manipulation of storytelling. And it is a manipulation. That's why we go to film school to do it, to learn how to manipulate people. in ways that are hopefully positive. And we have to be, yes, absolutely very careful how we do it.
Great. Thank you, dear Jan, dear Daniel, for this inspiring kickoff, basically, of the whole thing. I think it gives us a lot to think about. And the rest, and Martin, you can continue now.
So, thank you so much. Vielen Dank Ihnen allen, vielen Dank euch allen. Hat großen Spaß gemacht, wunderbarer Input, wirklich spannend. Ich glaube, da haben wir einiges zum Nachdenken auch nochmal und vielleicht für das ein oder andere Gespräch jetzt gleich oben. Die Bar ist nämlich jetzt eröffnet, von der ich vorhin gesprochen habe, also den ein oder anderen Drink können wir uns genehmigen und vielleicht über die Inhalte sprechen, die wir gerade gehört haben. Alle, die online zugeschaut haben, vielen Dank, dass ihr dabei wart. Morgen um 13 Uhr geht der Stream dann wieder weiter. Wir hören jetzt mal auf, weil beim Trinken müsst ihr uns nicht zugucken. Und ich freue mich, wenn ihr alle morgen auch wieder dabei seid, 13 Uhr. Nehmt euch gerne mal so ein Programm nochmal mit. Die liegen hier aus. Da seht ihr genau, wie es morgen weitergeht, wie es übermorgen weitergeht. Vielen Dank. Uns allen einen schönen Abend. Thank you so much. Ein Riesenapplaus bitte für das ganze Team. Dankeschön.
Great pleasure. Spaß.
Thank you. Thank you.